3:58 p.m. A centuries-old villa on Lake Como, Italy. Church bells chime through the scent of lilies and old money. Isabella Romano, the billionaire CEO, steps out of the black limousine, accompanied by a man in a simple off-the-rack suit. Guests whisper. They recognize him as just a nobody single dad. Ethan Cole, 41, holds the hand of his son, Leo. His eyes remain calm, even as the family sneers, "Is he just a guest?" The groom steps onto the altar. His face turns white. Before hundreds of elite guests, he gasps, "Boss!" The chapel freezes. Ethan Cole was a ghost in a world of giants. At 41, his life revolved around a single, fragile heartbeat. His 8-year-old son, Leo. 5 years ago, Ethan had been the man everyone wanted to be. He was the ghost of Wall Street, a visionary who could turn a failing motel chain into a global empire with a single phone call. But when his wife, Sarah, collapsed during a board meeting, her heart failing after years of hidden stress, Ethan's world shifted. The day Sarah died, the Ethan Cole, who ruled the hospitality world, died with her. He didn't just resign, he liquidated his majority shares, deleted his social footprint, and moved to a sleepy suburb where no one knew his name. He traded the roar of a private jet for the hum of a used station wagon. He traded the silk ties for cotton hoodies. He became a man who knew the price of milk, not the price of stocks. To his neighbors, Ethan was just the guy who's always at the park. A quiet widower who spent his Saturday mornings teaching his son how to identify constellations instead of reading the Financial Times. But today he was back in the lion's den. Isabella Romano, the iron-willed CEO of the Romano Group, stood beside him. She was a woman built of sharp angles and cold logic. Yet with Ethan, her edges softened. They had met a year ago at a library where Ethan was reading to a group of kids. Isabella had been struck by the stillness in his eyes, a peace she had never encountered in the shark tanks of Milan. Over time, Leo had become her shadow, and Ethan, her sanctuary. "You don't have to do this, Ethan," Isabella whispered as they approached the villa's massive iron gates. "My family, they aren't kind to people they don't understand." Ethan adjusted the cuff of his simple suit, a suit that cost less than the appetizers being served inside. He looked at Leo, who was staring in awe at the marble statues. "I'm not here for them, Bella. I'm here for you." And Leo wanted to see a castle. The judgment was instantaneous. As they stepped onto the manicured lawn, the old money of Europe turned their heads. The Romano family was a dynasty of velvet and venom. Isabella's sister, Sofia, the bride, was marrying Lorenzo Bianchi, a man whose face was on every business magazine in Italy. This was the wedding of the century. Isabella, her mother, Contessa Romano, approached them, her eyes scanning Ethan like a faulty piece of equipment. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't offer a smile. "You're late, and you brought guests." She lingered on the word guests, as if it were a synonym for infestation. "This is Ethan Cole," Isabella said, her voice like cracking ice. "And his son, Leo." The Contessa raised a lorgnette, peering at Ethan's shoes. "Cole? Of the Connecticut Coles? The shipping magnates?" "No, ma'am," Ethan replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Just Ethan. I work in education consulting." It was a half-truth. He consulted his son on his homework. The Contessa's face twisted into a mask of polite disgust. "Education? How noble." "Sophia's wedding is a €5 million affair, Isabella. There are prime ministers here. We have a reputation to maintain." She leaned in closer, whispering loud enough for Leo to hear. "The kitchen staff entrance is around the back if the boy gets restless. Don't let them wander near the cameras." Isabella's hand tightened on Ethan's arm, her knuckles white. She was ready to scorch the earth. But Ethan's hand covered hers. He gave her a small, imperceptible shake of the head. "The air is beautiful here, Bella," he said, looking at the lake. "Don't waste it on anger." But the snickers followed them like a shadow. Guests in $5,000 tuxedos pointed at Ethan's off-the-rack jacket. Women in diamonds shielded their children from Leo, as if poverty were contagious. "Daddy," Leo whispered, his voice trembling as they walked through the grand hall. Why are they looking at us like we're invisible? Are we not allowed to be here? Ethan didn't look at the crowd. He knelt down right there on the antique Persian rug. He ignored the scoffs of the passing socialites. He reached out and straightened Leo's tie, then tucked a stray hair behind the boy's ear. "Leo," Ethan said, his voice resonant and warm, cutting through the murmurs of the room. "The only people who are truly invisible are those who look at the world through a price tag. They can see the cost of everything, but the value of nothing. Look at me." Leo looked into his father's eyes. "You belong in any room you walk into, not because of what you wear, but because of who you are. Do you understand?" Leo nodded, his chest puffing out just a little. In that moment, to the elite crowd watching, Ethan looked like a struggling father trying to comfort a confused child. To them, it was a pathetic sight. They didn't realize they were looking at a man who had once commanded the very markets that funded their lifestyles. They had no idea that Ethan's weakness, his love for his son, was actually a level of power they would never achieve. The pre-wedding reception was a Shark Tank disguised as a garden party. While the guests sipped vintage Krug, the main topic of conversation wasn't the bride's dress. It was Isabella's charity case. "It's a midlife crisis," hissed a woman in a Chanel headpiece. "Isabella Romano has everything, so now she's playing at saving a commoner. Look at him. He's probably a waiter she met at a cafe." "Poor child," another added, gesturing toward Leo. "He looks like he's never seen a silver fork before. Isabella's making a mockery of her sister's big day." The Contessa had made her stance clear. When the seating chart was finalized, Ethan's name was missing from the VIP tables. Instead, he and Leo were placed at table 42, a small wobbly table tucked behind a massive floral arrangement near the service doors. "Isabella, this is an insult," Ethan whispered as they saw the seating. "I'll change it right now," Isabella said, her eyes burning. "No," Ethan smiled, pulling out a chair for Leo. "This is perfect. We have the best view of the lake, and we're close to the appetizers. Plus," he winked at Leo, "we don't have to listen to the Contessa talk about her husband's yacht for 3 hours." Leo giggled, and for a moment the tension vanished. Ethan began pointing out the different types of birds skimming across Lake Como. He described the history of the villa's architecture to Leo, explaining how the stones were carved centuries ago. He was a father first, a mentor second, and a billionaire never knew the silent observation. Isabella watched them from afar. She was supposed to be mingling with the European elite, shaking hands with ambassadors whose surnames were older than the countries they represented. But her gaze kept drifting back to table 42. She saw Ethan laughing as he accidentally spilled a bit of water on his napkin while trying to perform a magic trick for Leo. She saw the way his eyes lit up, not with the predatory fire of a CEO, but with the pure, unvarnished warmth of a man who found his entire universe in an 8-year-old's smile. "He's the most powerful man in this room," Isabella whispered to herself, "and he's the only one who doesn't care if anyone knows it." She felt a strange, unfamiliar pang of envy. These people, her family, the guests, were prisoners of their own status. Ethan was the only one who was truly free. Meanwhile, at the head table, the man of the hour made his entrance. Lorenzo Bianchi, 37. The Golden Boy. He was the CEO of Bianchi International, a hotel conglomerate that had recently acquired 3 of the most prestigious properties in Paris. To the Romano family, he was a god. He was the perfect merging of 2 fortunes. Lorenzo spent the hour performing. He moved from table to table, shaking hands with ambassadors and hedge fund managers. He spoke loudly about his aggressive expansion and his unrivaled vision. He was a man who believed his own press releases. He didn't notice the man at table 42. Why would he? Lorenzo only looked up. He looked for titles, for influence, for people who could do something for him. As the sun began to set, Lorenzo took the microphone for a pre-ceremony toast. The crowd fell silent. "I stand here today," Lorenzo began, his voice booming with artificial humility, "at the peak of my career. But I didn't get here alone. People ask me, 'Lorenzo, how did you build an empire before 40?' And I tell them, I learned from the best. He paused for effect, taking a sip of champagne. 10 years ago, I was a broke graduate with nothing but a dream. I met a man who saw something in me. He was the silent king of this industry. He taught me that business isn't about rooms and beds. It's about psychology. It's about war. He gave me my first $5 million. He guided my hand during my first hostile takeover. And then, one day, he just disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. He walked away from a $1 billion legacy as if it were trash. Lorenzo's voice tightened. I've spent a decade trying to find him, not just to thank him, but to show him that the student has surpassed the master. I wanted him to see that I've taken his crown and made it bigger, but I suppose ghosts don't care about crowns. A ripple of applause went through the room. Isabella looked at Ethan. He was staring at his reflection in the water glass, his expression unreadable. Ethan, she whispered. He was always a bit too fond of the spotlight, Ethan murmured, almost to himself. I told him once that a true leader doesn't need to be seen. He just needs to be felt. I see he forgot that lesson. Was he talking about you? Isabella's voice was barely a breath. Ethan looked at her, and for a second, the single dad was gone. In his place was a man with eyes of cold, hardened steel. He's talking about a version of me that Sarah hated. That man died with her. Lorenzo was chasing a shadow. Knew the final shred of pride. The wedding march began. The guests moved toward the private chapel, a stunning structure of white marble and gold leaf. The Romano family pushed past Ethan and Leo, the Contessa even stepping on Leo's foot without an apology. Watch where you stand, boy, she snapped, not even looking down. Ethan caught Leo before he could fall. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply stood up, towering over the Contessa. He didn't say a word, but the sheer weight of his presence made the woman falter for a second. There was a gravity to him, an invisible power that silenced her for a heartbeat. Keep moving, mother, Isabella said, her voice sharp. You're blocking the path. As they entered the chapel, the atmosphere was electric. The grand success of the groom was the talk of every pew. No one noticed the man in the simple suit taking a seat in the very last row, holding a small boy in his lap. They were focused on the gold. They were focused on the glory. They had no idea that the source of all that glory was sitting among them, unnoticed and unasked. The chapel was a cathedral of silence. The scent of incense and expensive perfume hung heavy in the air. Sophia Romano moved down the aisle in a dress encrusted with 10,000 Swarovski crystals. She looked like a masterpiece. At the altar, Lorenzo Bianchi stood tall. He was the picture of confidence, the man who had surpassed the master. He looked out at the front rows, the VIPs, the politicians, the Romano dynasty. He felt like he finally belonged. The ceremony proceeded with the rhythmic precision of a Swiss watch. The vows were exchanged. The rings were brought forward. The priest began the final blessing. If anyone has a reason why these two should not be joined, the priest began the traditional, often ignored phrase. Silence followed, as expected. But then the wind shifted. A large floral arrangement near the back of the chapel toppled over, caught by a draft from the open doors. Lorenzo's eyes flickered toward the noise. He looked past the celebrities. He looked past the cameras. He looked toward the shadow of the back row. He saw a child first, a boy with bright eyes and a curious expression, and then he saw the man holding him. The air in the chapel seemed to vanish. Lorenzo's face didn't just turn white, it turned a ghastly, translucent gray. The ring he was about to place on Sophia's finger slipped from his trembling hands, bouncing off the marble floor with a sharp metallic clink that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Lorenzo, Sophia whispered, her brow furrowing. What's wrong? Lorenzo didn't hear her. He didn't see her. The entire world had narrowed down to one point in the back of the room. He stepped off the altar. The guests gasped. The Contessa stood up, her hand flying to her throat. Lorenzo walked down the long, red-carpeted aisle. His gait was stumbling, as if he were walking through a dream or a nightmare. He stopped right in front of the last row. He looked at Ethan Cole. The hundreds of elite guests turned in their seats, their necks craning. They saw the billionaire groom standing before the nobody single dad. Boss? Lorenzo's voice was a ragged whisper, barely audible, yet in the silence of the chapel it hit like a thunderclap. Is it really you? I, I've searched every corner of the world. I thought you were gone. Twist 1. The hidden architect revealed. Ethan Cole didn't just know business. He was the Cole Group. He was the legend who had created the Bianchi method that Lorenzo bragged about. 10 years ago, Ethan had found Lorenzo working as a night clerk in a Fleabag motel. He had seen a spark in the young man. He had mentored him, funded his first acquisition, and built the corporate structure that now supported Lorenzo's entire life. Ethan was the master Lorenzo claimed to have surpassed. The chapel erupted in a chaotic roar of whispers. The Cole Group? The ghost of Wall Street? That's him? The Contessa looked as if she were about to faint. The woman she had called education consultant was the man her son-in-law owed his entire existence to. Twist 2. The reversal of power. Lorenzo didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the Romano reputation. He began to lower his head, his knees buckling as if he were about to kneel in the middle of the aisle. "Sir, please," Lorenzo choked out. "You're sitting in the back. At my wedding, I am a fool. Please come to the altar. You should be the one standing here." The Romano family watched in absolute horror. The man they had relegated to table 42, the man they had treated like a second-class citizen, was now the center of the universe. Ethan stood up. He didn't look like a billionaire. He didn't look like a boss. He looked like a father who had been interrupted during a quiet moment. He placed a hand on Lorenzo's shoulder, a firm, grounding touch. "Lorenzo," Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight of authority that silenced every murmur in the room. "Look at your bride. She's been waiting for you for 10 minutes. This day isn't about the past. It's not about me. It's about the promises you're making to her." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a private tone. "You wanted to show me you surpassed me? Then show me by finishing these vows with dignity. A leader doesn't leave his post when things get complicated." Lorenzo looked at Ethan, then back at Sophia. He took a shaky breath. "Yes, boss. You're right. I'm sorry." "Go," Ethan said, giving him a gentle push toward the altar. "And Lorenzo, pick up the ring. It's bad luck to leave it on the floor." Lorenzo walked back to the altar, his head bowed in a level of humility no one had ever seen from him. The golden boy was gone. In his place was a student, reminded of his place in the world. The energy in the chapel had shifted forever. The Romano family was frozen, the Contessa staring at Ethan with a mixture of terror and realization. The invisible man was now the only thing anyone could see. Ethan sat back down, pulled Leo close, and whispered, "See, Leo? Some people are louder than others, but the quiet ones, they're the ones who hold the world together." The wedding ceremony concluded, but the celebration that followed was unlike any the Romano family had ever seen. The hierarchy of the Lake Como elite had been dismantled in a single afternoon. The reception was no longer an apology tour. It was a total capitulation. Lorenzo Bianchi took the stage for the main toast. He didn't look at his parents. He didn't look at the Romano dynasty. He looked directly at table 42, which had already been frantically relocated by the staff to the very center of the room. "Tonight," Lorenzo began, his voice devoid of his usual arrogance, "is supposed to be a celebration of my success. But as I stand here, I am forced to admit that my success is a borrowed light. 10 years ago, a man found me in the dirt. He gave me a chair, a desk, and a future. He didn't ask for my soul. He didn't ask for a percentage. He told me that power is only useful if you use it to protect those who can't protect themselves." He took a deep breath, his eyes glistening. "I forgot that. I got lost in the gold and the marble. But today, the man who built me showed up. He didn't come in a private jet. He didn't come with a security detail. He came with his son. He showed me that the greatest empire a man can build isn't a hotel chain. It's the character of his child." The room was so quiet you could hear the waves of the lake hitting the shore. "I am honored to have Ethan Cole here today," Lorenzo concluded, "not as my boss, but as the man I hope to become." knew the price of arrogance. The Contessa Romano was a woman of quick pivots. She saw the tide turning. She approached Ethan's table, her face twisted into a desperate, oily smile. She held a glass of the finest vintage. "Ethan, darling," she cooed, her voice like honey mixed with glass. "There must have been a terrible misunderstanding with the seating. The staff, you know how they can be, so incompetent. Please, let's move you to the Romano family table. There's a seat right next to me." Ethan didn't look up from his plate. He was busy cutting a piece of steak into small bites for Leo. "I'm quite comfortable here, Contessa," Ethan said, his voice cool and detached. "Leo likes the flowers at this table, and frankly, the staff have been the only people here who treated us with genuine kindness before the groom started talking. I think I'll stay with them." The Contessa's smile faltered, her face turning a blotchy red. She had been publicly snubbed by a man she had insulted only hours before. She retreated, her pride in tatters. New Leo's moment. Suddenly, Leo tapped Ethan on the arm. "Daddy, why is that lady crying?" He pointed to Sophia, who was overwhelmed by the sudden weight of the moment. Ethan leaned in, whispering so only Leo and Isabella could hear. "She's not crying because she's sad, Leo. She's crying because she just realized that her world is much bigger than she thought it was. It's a scary thing to realize you've been living in a small box." Isabella reached out and took Ethan's hand under the table. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was one of utter, unwavering devotion. She had brought a single dad to a wedding, and in return, he had saved her family from their own vanity. Isabella stepped forward then. She didn't say anything. She didn't make a speech. She simply walked over to table 42, took the seat next to Ethan, and began talking to Leo about his favorite birds. The billionaire CEO of the Romano Group had made her choice. She wasn't standing with the dynasty, she was standing with the man. If you believe respect matters more than status, if you believe a father's love is the ultimate currency, type, "I will live kindly." The rest of the evening was a surreal blur. The elite guests, the ones who had mocked Ethan's suit, now queued up like children in a school line, waiting for a chance to speak to him. They brought their business cards. They brought their investment proposals. Ethan rejected them all. He didn't take a single card. He didn't listen to a single pitch. He spent the entire night focused on Leo. When the music got too loud, he took Leo out to the gardens to look at the stars. When Leo got tired, Ethan carried him on his shoulder, the boy's head resting against the off-the-rack suit that was now more valuable to the guests than any silk. The wedding ended, but the impact of Ethan Cole's reappearance rippled through the industry for years. Ethan didn't return to the corporate world. He didn't reclaim his seat at the head of the Cole Group. He didn't launch a new fund. He went back to his modest house in the suburbs. He went back to the library. He went back to being a single dad. But things had changed for everyone else. Lorenzo Bianchi ran his hotels differently now. He stopped firing staff for minor mistakes. He started an education fund for the children of his night clerks. He became a man who valued the ghosts in his own company. He visited Ethan once a month, not for business advice, but to learn how to be a better man. Isabella and Ethan's relationship grew into something that the Romano family could never understand. It wasn't built on a merger of assets. It was built on a foundation of shared silence and deep respect. Isabella eventually stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to a trusted board so she could spend more time in the quiet world Ethan had built. The final scene, a year later. Lake Como is a distant memory. Ethan and Isabella are at a small local park. Leo is running across the grass, laughing as he tries to catch a firefly in the twilight. Isabella stands next to Ethan, her hand in his. The billionaire ice queen is gone. She looks at him, the man who walked away from a kingdom. "Do you ever regret it?" she asks softly. "The empire you left behind, the billions, the fame. Today you could have been the most powerful man in Europe." Ethan looks at Leo, who has finally caught a firefly and is showing it to a group of other children. His face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. Ethan smiles, a real deep smile that Sarah would have recognized. I didn't walk away from an empire, Isabella, he says, his voice a steady anchor. I walked toward the only thing that actually matters. Power is just noise. This is the music. They mocked a guest. They met a mentor. And a child watched his father be honored. Not because he asked for it, but because he was the only one who didn't need it. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories that remind us of the value of character over capital, leave a comment and subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.